The stagecoach rattled into Chisum Ranch, New Mexico territory, with a woman aboard who looked like she had seen the devil himself. And Garrett Dawson knew trouble when he saw it coming down the dusty main road on a hot afternoon in July of 1878. He had been leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, rolling a cigarette and minding his own business after a long week moving cattle across the Pecos River bottomlands. The stage came to a lurching halt, wheels groaning against the brake, dust billowing up in great clouds that caught the slanting sunlight. The driver, old Pete Morrison, climbed down with his usual grumbling about the heat and the sorry state of the roads, but Garrett barely heard him. His attention had fixed on the woman stepping out of the coach, gripping the frame so hard her knuckles showed white even through the grime of travel. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and hung in disheveled waves around her face. Her dress, once probably a respectable traveling outfit in deep green, was covered in dust and showed signs of hasty mending. But it was her eyes that caught him, held him frozen there with the unlit cigarette between his fingers. They were the color of spring grass after rain, wide and darting, taking in everything around her with the desperate wariness of a deer who had barely escaped the wolves. She clutched a small carpetbag to her chest like a shield and took one step, then another, into the street. Her gaze swept across the buildings, the few people walking about in the afternoon heat, the horses tied up along the rails. When her eyes met his for just a moment, Garrett saw something in them that made his chest tighten. Raw fear, bone deep and immediate, the kind that came from real danger and not just nervous travel. Pete was hauling down a trunk from the top of the stage, complaining about his back, when a man swung down from the coach behind her. This one was dressed too fine for Chisum Ranch, in a city suit with a brocade vest and a watch chain that caught the light. He was maybe 40, with slicked-back dark hair going gray at the temples and a thin mouth that curved into what might have been a smile but had no warmth in it. "Kaitlyn," the man said, and the woman flinched at the sound of her name. "Do not wander off. We still have matters to discuss." She did not turn to look at him. "I have nothing more to say to you, Mr. Henderson. Your father's debts say otherwise." Henderson's voice carried easily across the street, drawing glances from the handful of people nearby. $2,300. That is not a sum that disappears simply because you run away to this godless frontier. Garrett felt his jaw tighten. He had seen this kind of thing before, men wielding debt and obligation like weapons against women who had no legal recourse. He dropped the unlit cigarette and straightened up from the hitching post, his hand automatically checking that his Colt was loose in its holster. He was not a man who went looking for trouble, but he had never been able to stomach bullies. The woman, Kaitlyn, finally turned to face Henderson. Her chin came up, and despite the fear still evident in her eyes, there was steel in her voice when she spoke. "My father is dead. I am not responsible for his gambling debts. The lawyer in Santa Fe told me as much." Henderson took a step closer to her, crowding into her space in a way that made Garrett's blood heat. "Perhaps not in law, Miss Reynolds, but there are other ways to settle debts. Your father made promises, promises that involved you, promises he had no right to make." Her voice shook now, anger mixing with fear. "I am not property to be bargained with. That is where you are wrong." Henderson reached for her arm. Garrett was moving before he made a conscious decision to intervene. His boots hit the packed dirt of the street in long strides that closed the distance in seconds. "I believe the lady said she had nothing more to say to you." Henderson's hand stopped an inch from Kaitlyn's sleeve. He turned to regard Garrett with the kind of dismissive once-over that city men often gave to working cowboys, taking in the worn denim, the dust-caked boots, the sun-darkened skin. "This is a private matter. Move along." "Funny thing about private matters," Garrett said, keeping his voice easy but letting his right hand rest casually near his gun belt. "When you conduct them in the middle of a public street, they stop being all that private. Lady says she does not want to talk to you. That makes it pretty simple." For a moment Henderson just stared at him, clearly weighing his options. Garrett was 6 feet tall and broad through the shoulders from years of hard ranch work, and he had a reputation in this part of the territory for being steady but not someone to push. Henderson must have seen something in his eyes because he took a small step back. "This is not finished, Miss Reynolds," Henderson said coldly. "I will be staying at the boarding house. We will speak again before I return to Santa Fe." "There is nothing to speak about," Kaitlyn said quietly. Henderson gave her a thin smile that made Garrett's skin crawl. "We shall see. Your father owed money to some very serious men in Denver. They have long memories and little patience. Running to this dusty cattle town will not save you." With that, he turned on his heel and strode toward the boarding house at the far end of the street, his city boots kicking up small puffs of dust with each step. Garrett watched him go until he disappeared through the boarding house door, then turned his attention to the woman still standing rigid beside the stagecoach. Up close, he could see she was trembling despite the heat, her hands still clutching that carpetbag like a lifeline. The fear in her eyes had not diminished even with Henderson gone. "You all right, miss?" he asked gently, the way he would speak to a spooked horse. She blinked, seemed to really see him for the first time. Her gaze traveled over his face, searching for something. "I do not know," she said honestly. "I do not know if I will ever be all right again." The raw honesty of it struck him silent for a moment. Pete had finished unloading her trunk and was already climbing back up to the driver's seat, ready to move on to his next stop. The stage would continue west to Roswell before circling back through next week. Garrett looked at the trunk sitting in the street, at this frightened woman who had nowhere to go, and felt something shift in his chest. "You have people here in Chisum Ranch?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She shook her head. "No, I just needed to go somewhere far from Denver, far from Santa Fe. I saw this place on the route map and it seemed as far from everything as I could get." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Foolish, I suppose." "He followed me anyway." "Not foolish," Garrett said firmly. "Smart to run from a man like that, but you cannot stand in the middle of the street all day and you need somewhere safe to stay. The boarding house is out since that is where he is. My employer, John Chisum, his ranch is a few miles out of town. His niece Sally runs the main house, and she is always looking for help with the cooking and such. Would pay a fair wage and the bunkhouse rules are strict. No man sets foot near the main house without permission, and Chisum enforces it with a shotgun if need be." Kaitlyn's eyes widened. "I could not impose. You do not even know me. I could be anyone, anything." "You are someone running from something bad," Garrett said simply. "That is all I need to know. The rest, well, that is your business unless you choose to share it." He bent to pick up her trunk, grunting slightly at the weight. "Come on, I will drive you out there myself. My horse is just down the street and I can borrow a wagon from the livery." She hesitated, every line of her body tense with indecision. He could practically see her weighing her limited options, calculating risks. Finally, she gave a small nod. "All right, thank you, Mr. Dawson, Garrett Dawson. Been working for Chisum for near about 5 years now." "Kaitlyn Reynolds," she said, and the fact that she gave her real name felt like a measure of trust. Small but significant, he smiled at her, trying to project calm reliability. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Reynolds, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Let me get that wagon and we will get you somewhere safe." The ride out to the Chisum Ranch took about 40 minutes, following the rough wagon road that paralleled the Pecos River through brown grassland dotted with scrub and mesquite. Garrett kept the borrowed horses at an easy pace, mindful of the heat and the rough road. Beside him on the wagon seat, Kaitlyn sat stiff and silent for the first few miles, her hands folded tightly in her lap, that carpetbag still clutched close. The fear had not left her eyes, but she was looking around now, taking in the vast openness of the New Mexico landscape. It was a hard country, beautiful in its starkness, all sun-bleached earth and endless sky. Garrett had always loved it, the way it made a man feel both small and free at the same time. "It is very different from Denver," Kaitlyn said finally, her voice quiet. "I imagine so. I have never been that far north, but I hear it is quite a city now." "It is. Crowded and noisy and full of people all pressing in on each other." She paused, seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "My father moved us there 3 years ago. He said there were opportunities, business ventures that would make our fortune." Garrett heard what she was not saying in the careful way she spoke, but the ventures did not work out. No, he gambled. At first just small amounts at cards or horses, but then it got worse. He met men like Mr. Henderson who ran gambling houses, who loaned money at terrible rates. He kept saying the next game would turn things around, that he would win it all back. He never did. When he died 6 months ago, I discovered he had debts I could not even begin to pay. And worse, he had made promises. She fell silent again, and Garrett did not push. They rode on through the heat, the wagon wheels creaking, the horses' hooves clopping steadily against the packed earth. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals, and in the distance a small herd of pronghorn antelope bounded away from the road. "He promised me," Kaitlyn said suddenly, the words tumbling out like she had been holding them in too long. "He promised me to a man named Carlton DeVries, one of the men he owed money to. Said I would marry DeVries and the debt would be forgiven. He signed papers, some kind of contract. When I refused after father died, DeVries sent men like Henderson to collect on what he called a binding agreement." Rage, hot and immediate, flooded through Garrett. He had to force his hands to stay relaxed on the reins to keep his voice level. "That is not legal. You cannot sign away another person's freedom, not even your own daughter's." The lawyer in Santa Fe said the same thing. But DeVries has money and influence, and Henderson made it very clear that they do not care much about what is legal. They want what they believe they are owed, either in money or in me. She turned to look at him directly for the first time since they had left town, and the fear in her eyes was mixed now with desperate hope. "So I ran. I took what little money I had from selling our furniture, and I got on the first stage heading away from Santa Fe. But I do not know what to do now. I have maybe $60 left to my name and nowhere to go." Garrett was quiet for a moment, thinking. The Chisum Ranch sprawled across vast acreage, a cattle empire that employed dozens of men and produced beef for markets as far away as Kansas City. John Chisum was tough as boot leather and had a reputation for running a tight operation, but he was also known to be fair and protective of those who worked for him. If Kaitlyn could find a place there, she would be as safe as anywhere in the territory. "You let me talk to Sally," he said finally. "She is good people and she will understand. Even if it is just temporary until you figure out your next move, you will have a roof over your head and honest work if you want it." "Why are you helping me?" Kaitlyn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not know me." "This is not your problem." Garrett thought about that for a moment, watching the road ahead. "My mother," he said slowly, "she died when I was 12. But before that, there was a time when my father was not a good man. He drank and he had a mean temper. I remember once, I must have been about 8, he came home drunk and angry about something, started throwing things, yelling. My mother grabbed me and my sister and we ran to the neighbors in the middle of the night. Man named Thomas Garrett, actually, I am named for him. He took us in, no questions asked, stood on his porch with a rifle when my father came pounding on the door, told him to come back sober or not at all. He glanced at Kaitlyn, saw she was listening intently. My father did sober up eventually. Took a few years, but he got right with himself and with us. But I never forgot what Thomas did, taking us in like that. He did not know if we were telling the truth or exaggerating or what. He just knew someone needed help and he gave it. Always figured I should try to do the same when I could. Kaitlyn's eyes had gone bright with unshed tears. Your mother, she was all right after that, she was. Lived until I was 12, then got sick one winter. Fever took her quick. He cleared his throat, pushing away the old grief. But those years after my father sobered up, she was happy. She used to say that sometimes all a person needs is a moment of peace to catch their breath and figure out their path. That is what Thomas gave us. Figure maybe I can pass that along. A moment of peace, Kaitlyn repeated softly. I cannot remember the last time I felt peaceful. Then maybe it is about time you did. They crested a low rise, and the Chisum Ranch spread out before them. The main house, a sprawling adobe structure with a wide porch, and several outbuildings clustered around it. Corrals full of horses stretched out behind the house, and in the distance, Garrett could see the massive herds of cattle that made Chisum one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and orange, and for a moment it looked almost beautiful despite the harsh country. Sally Chisum was in the kitchen when Garrett knocked on the door frame, calling out a greeting. She was a handsome woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and came to the door, taking in Garrett and then Kaitlyn with a quick assessing look. Garrett, who is your friend? Miss Kaitlyn Reynolds, madam. She arrived on the stage today from Santa Fe and finds herself in need of honest work and a safe place to stay. I was hoping you might have room for another pair of hands around here. Sally's eyes sharpened, catching all the things Garrett was not saying out loud. She looked at Kaitlyn more carefully, noting the fear still lingering in her expression, the way she held herself like she expected a blow. You know anything about cooking and cleaning, Miss Reynolds? Yes, madam. I kept house for my father for 3 years before he passed. I can cook most basic meals, clean, mend clothes, whatever needs doing. Can you handle men who work hard and sometimes have rough manners but mean no real harm? I believe so. Sally studied her for another long moment, then nodded decisively. All right then. Room and board plus $20 a month. You will help me with the cooking and the housework. There is a small room off the kitchen that was meant for a housekeeper, been empty since the last girl got married last spring. It is yours if you want it. The relief that washed over Kaitlyn's face was so profound that Garrett felt his throat tighten. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Do not thank me yet, you have not seen how much work there is to do around here, Sally said, but her eyes were kind. Garrett, you help her bring her things in, then get yourself to supper. We are having beef stew and biscuits in about an hour. The next few weeks settled into a routine that slowly, gradually, seemed to ease some of the tight fear that Kaitlyn carried like a second skin. Garrett made it his business to check on her every day, usually finding some excuse to stop by the main house for one reason or another. He told himself it was just to make sure she was settling in all right, that Henderson had not tried anything, but he knew it was more than that. He found himself drawn to her in ways he had not expected. It was not just that she was pretty, though she was that, especially once the haunted look began to fade from her eyes, and she smiled more often. It was the quiet strength he saw in her, the way she had run toward an uncertain future rather than accept the fate others had tried to force on her. It was the careful way she moved through the world, alert but not defeated, still hoping for something better even after everything she had been through. And she was drawn to him too, he could tell. He caught her watching him sometimes when he came in from the range, her eyes tracking his movements with an expression he could not quite read, but that made warmth bloom in his chest. She always had coffee ready when he stopped by in the mornings, and she remembered that he liked it strong and black. Small things, but they felt significant. One evening about 3 weeks after she had arrived, Garrett found her sitting on the porch of the main house as the sun set, shelling peas into a bowl in her lap. The worst of the day's heat had faded, and a slight breeze carried the smell of sage and dust. He climbed the steps and leaned against the porch rail, watching her work. "How are you settling in?" he asked. She looked up and smiled, and the genuine warmth in it made something in his chest flip over. "Better than I could have imagined. Sally is wonderful to work for, and the work itself is satisfying. I feel useful, which I have not felt in a long time." "That is good." He hesitated, then added, "Henderson left town about a week ago, took the stage back to Santa Fe," her hand stilled in the bowl of peas. "Do you think he will come back?" "I do not know. But you are safe here. Chisum does not let anyone mess with his people, and he has made it known in town that you are under his protection. That counts for a lot in these parts." Kaitlyn nodded slowly, her fingers resuming their work. "I want to believe I can build a life here, that I can stop running and looking over my shoulder, but I am afraid to hope too much." Garrett moved to sit beside her on the porch step, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Hope is hard when you have been hurt. But it is worth holding on to anyway. This is a hard country, but it is honest. A person can make something real here if they are willing to work for it." She turned to look at him, and in the fading light her eyes were luminous. "Is that what you did? Made something real?" "Trying to," he said honestly. "I came out here 5 years ago with nothing but a saddle and my horse, worked my way up to lead hand on the cattle drives, saved most of my pay. Figure in another year or two I might have enough to buy a small piece of land, start my own herd. Something that is mine, you know." "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. "Having something that belongs to you that no one can take away." "Yeah." He was very aware of how close she was, the warmth of her presence in the cooling evening air. "What about you? What do you want, Kaitlyn?" She was quiet for a long time, thinking. "Peace," she said finally. "Safety. A place where I can wake up in the morning without fear, maybe eventually someone to trust." She glanced at him, then away. "That probably sounds silly, not even a little bit." He reached over and gently took one of her hands, her fingers cool against his calloused palm. "You have already got the first 2, or you are getting there. The third, well, I hope you know you can trust me." Her fingers tightened around his. "I am beginning to." They sat there as darkness fell over the ranch, her hand in his, and Garrett felt something settle in his chest that he had not even known was restless. Whatever was growing between them, it felt right in a way few things ever had in his life. The trouble came, as trouble always did in the territory, on a Tuesday morning when Garrett was helping move cattle to a different grazing area. One of the younger ranch hands came galloping up on a lathered horse, yelling for Garrett before he had even pulled to a stop. "There are men at the main house." The kid, a 17-year-old named Billy, shouted. "3 of them, asking for Miss Reynolds. Sally sent me to fetch you quick." Garrett did not waste time with questions. He spurred his horse into a gallop back toward the main house, his heart hammering in his chest. 3 men. Henderson must have come back with reinforcements. The 5-mile ride felt like 50, every second stretching out while his mind raced through terrible possibilities. He could see them as he approached, 3 figures on the porch of the main house. Sally stood in the doorway with a shotgun cradled in her arms, her stance making it clear she knew how to use it. Kaitlyn was not visible, which hopefully meant she was safely inside. The 3 men were dressed for travel but well armed, and even from a distance Garrett could see the confident arrogance of hired guns. He pulled his horse to a sliding stop and dismounted in one smooth motion, his hand resting on his pistol as he strode toward the porch. "Something I can help you gentlemen with," the tallest of the 3, a lean man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, looked him over. "You would be the cowboy who interfered in Chisum Ranch a few weeks back. Henderson mentioned you. If by interfered you mean stopped a man from harassing a woman, then yeah, that was me. And you are trespassing on private property." "We just want to talk to Miss Reynolds," another one said, this one shorter and broad with a scar across his jaw. "Have a civil conversation about her obligations." "She has no obligations to you or anyone you work for," Garrett said flatly. "And there is nothing civil about 3 armed men showing up to intimidate a woman. So I will say this once, get back on your horses and ride out of here. We will pretend this visit never happened." Pockmarked face smiled, and it was not pleasant. "Mr. DeVries does not take kindly to people welching on agreements. Miss Reynolds' father signed a contract. That makes her DeVries' property, legally speaking. That is not how the law works, and you know it." Garrett took a step closer, his voice dropping lower. "But even if it was, even if you had the law on your side, which you do not, you would still have to go through me to get to her. I am willing to do that. Question is, are you?" The tension on that porch could have been cut with a knife. Garrett was outnumbered, but he had Sally with her shotgun backing him up, and the main ranch house was visible from here, which meant other ranch hands would be coming soon. The 3 men seemed to be calculating odds, weighing orders against survival. Then Kaitlyn stepped out onto the porch, moving past Sally despite the older woman's protest. "Stop," she said, her voice steady even though Garrett could see she was terrified. "Do not fight over me, I will talk to them." "The hell you will," Garrett said immediately. She looked at him, and the trust in her eyes nearly broke him. "It will be all right. I just need to make them understand." She turned to the 3 men, lifting her chin. "My father had no right to make any promises involving me. I am not property, and I will not honor any agreement he made. Tell Mr. DeVries that he will never see a penny of that debt or anything else from me. If he has a legal case, he can take it to a court. Otherwise, leave me alone." Pockmarked face shook his head slowly. "That is not how this works, miss. DeVries wants what he is owed one way or another. He sent us to bring you back to Denver. You can come peaceful or otherwise, but you are coming." "Like hell she is," Garrett said, and his gun cleared leather so fast that 2 of the men were still reaching for their own weapons when they found themselves staring down his barrel. "Sally, you have got Scarface there covered." "Right between the eyes," Sally confirmed calmly, the shotgun never wavering. For a long, breathless moment, nobody moved. Then hoofbeats announced the arrival of more ranch hands, and suddenly the 3 hired guns were looking at 5 armed cowboys and 1 woman with a shotgun, all of whom appeared perfectly willing to start shooting. Pockmarked face slowly raised his hands. All right, we are going. But you are making a big mistake, girl. DeVries has a long reach and longer memory. This is not over." "Yes, it is," Kaitlyn said with a certainty that Garrett admired. "Tell Mr. DeVries that if he sends anyone else after me, I will go to every newspaper between here and Denver and tell them exactly what kind of man he is. See how his business interests hold up when people know he tries to buy women like cattle. The threat hung in the air, and Garrett saw the flicker of worry cross pockmarked faces' expression. Men like DeVries depended on respectability, on a certain public image. A scandal like that could ruin him, especially in a city like Denver that was trying to present itself as civilized and modern. "Get out," Garrett said quietly, "and do not come back." They went, mounting up and riding out without looking back. Garrett kept his gun drawn until they were well down the road and out of sight, then finally holstered it and turned to Kaitlyn. She was shaking now, the adrenaline and fear catching up with her, and without thinking he pulled her into his arms. She came willingly, pressing her face against his chest, her whole body trembling. "I am so tired of being afraid," she whispered against his shirt. "So tired of running. I know. I know." He held her tight, one hand stroking her hair. "But you stood up to them. You were so brave, Kaitlyn." "I did not feel brave. Bravery is not about not being scared. It is about being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, using his thumb to wipe away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You are the strongest person I know." She let out a shaky laugh. "You do not know many people then. I know enough." He was still holding her, aware that Sally and the other ranch hands were tactfully looking elsewhere but unable to let go. "Kaitlyn, I want you to know something. I will not let anyone take you anywhere you do not want to go. I promise you that." "You cannot promise that," she said sadly. "You are one man. DeVries has money and connections and hired guns. Then we will deal with all of that together." The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once said, he realized he meant them completely. "If you will let me, if you trust me enough." She looked up at him, searching his face. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" "Because somewhere in the last month you became important to me," he said honestly. "Because when I think about my future, about that piece of land I want to buy and the life I want to build, I cannot picture it without you in it. I know that is probably too much too soon, and if you need time I understand, but I needed to say it." Kaitlyn's eyes had gone very wide. "Garrett, I have nothing. No money, no prospects, nothing but the clothes in my trunk and $60 that is dwindling every day even though Sally pays me. I am not a good bet for anyone's future." "You have yourself," he said firmly. "Your courage and your kindness and your strength. That is worth more than any amount of money." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And I think maybe you feel something for me too. Am I wrong?" "No," she whispered. "You are not wrong. I think I started falling for you the day you stepped in with Henderson, when you gave me a way out without asking for anything in return. And every day since, watching you, seeing the kind of man you are, it has just gotten stronger. Then we face this together," he said. "Whatever comes, we do it together." "All right," she nodded, and then she was kissing him, rising up on her toes to press her lips to his. It was gentle and fierce all at once, full of promise and hope and the beginning of something real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sally's dry voice came from the doorway. "Well, it is about time. You two have been dancing around each other for weeks. Now both of you get inside before you give the ranch hands any more of a show." Despite everything, Garrett found himself laughing, and after a moment Kaitlyn joined in, the sound bright and free. They went inside together, his arm around her shoulders, and for the first time since she had arrived on that stagecoach, she looked like she believed she might actually be safe. The next few days were tense as they waited to see if DeVries would make another move, but nothing happened. Garrett spent as much time as he could at the main house without neglecting his duties, and John Chisum made it clear that he backed his people completely. He even rode into town and had a pointed conversation with the marshal about ensuring that any strangers asking about Kaitlyn Reynolds were to be watched closely. During this time, Garrett and Kaitlyn grew closer in ways that felt both natural and profound. They talked for hours on the porch in the evenings after her work was done, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their fears. He told her about growing up in Kansas, about learning to cowboy from his father after the man had sobered up, about the restlessness that had driven him west. She told him about her childhood in St. Louis, about her mother who had died when she was young, about moving from town to town as her father chased one failed opportunity after another. "I swore I would never be dependent on anyone again," she said one evening as they sat watching the stars come out. "After Father died and I saw the mess he had left, I promised myself I would make my own way, be my own person." "You still can be," Garrett said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Being with someone does not mean losing yourself. It means choosing to build something together, each person whole and strong on their own but better together." "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. "To build something together, more than anything." He turned to face her, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been even facing down 3 hired guns. "I know it has only been a few weeks. I know we should probably take more time, be more sensible about this. But I am not a particularly sensible man when it comes to you, Kaitlyn Reynolds. I love you. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you step off that stage with fear in your eyes but steel in your spine. And if you will have me, I want to marry you. I want to buy that land and build us a home and spend the rest of my life making sure you always feel safe and loved." Kaitlyn's breath caught. In the starlight, her eyes shimmered with tears, but she was smiling. "That is the most wonderful thing anyone has ever said to me. Yes, Garrett. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes. But it is a good kind of scared, the kind that comes from caring about something real and true." He kissed her then, long and sweet, and when they finally pulled apart they were both grinning like fools. "We should do this proper," Garrett said. "I will talk to John about taking a few days off. We can ride into Lincoln where the county seat is and get married by the justice of the peace. Then, when I have saved enough for the land, we will build our home and start our life for real." "That sounds perfect," Kaitlyn said. "But Garrett, I need to tell you something first, about the money Father owed, about DeVries. You do not have to explain anything. I want to. I need you to know the whole truth." She took a deep breath. "The total debt was $2,300. An impossible sum. Before Father died, before I even knew about the arrangement, DeVries approached me. He said he would forgive the entire debt if I agreed to become his mistress. Not even his wife, just his mistress. When I refused, that was when Father told me about the contract, about his promise that I would marry DeVries or one of DeVries's associates to settle the debt. He was sick by then, dying, and he said I had to do this, that it was the only way." Garrett felt rage burning in his gut, but kept his voice calm. "What did you do?" I told him no. I told him I would rather live in poverty the rest of my life than be sold like property. We fought about it until the day he died, and he went to his grave angry at me for refusing. After he was gone, I tried to settle the estate. There was nothing left. The lawyer said Father's promise meant nothing legally, but DeVries sent Henderson anyway. Then those 3 men today. I just needed you to know the full story in case it changes anything." "It does not change a single thing," Garrett said firmly. "Except maybe to make me even more certain that you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. You stood up for yourself when the whole world was telling you to give in. That takes real courage." "I was so scared," she admitted. "I still am sometimes. Scared that DeVries will find some way to force the issue, or that something will happen to take this happiness away from me. Then we will just have to prove those fears wrong," Garrett said. "Together." They were married 3 weeks later in Lincoln. a small ceremony with Sally and John Chisum as witnesses. Kaitlyn wore a simple dress that Sally had helped her make from fabric they had bought in town, and Garrett wore his cleanest shirt and had even gotten a haircut for the occasion. It was not fancy, but it was real and true, and when the justice of the peace pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett felt like the luckiest man in all of New Mexico territory. They spent their wedding night at the boarding house in Lincoln, and it was sweet and tender and everything Garrett had hoped for. Kaitlyn was nervous at first, but he took his time, showing her with gentle hands and whispered words how much he loved her, how precious she was to him. By morning, she was smiling and relaxed in a way he had never seen before, and the sight of her like that made his chest feel like it might burst with happiness. They returned to the Chisum Ranch and settled into a new routine, this time sharing a small cabin that Chisum had offered them, until Garrett had saved enough to buy land. Garrett continued working the cattle while Kaitlyn kept helping Sally with the housework, both of them saving every penny they could. It was hard work and long days, but they were building toward something real, something that belonged to them alone. 3 months after the wedding, a letter arrived from Denver. Garrett found Kaitlyn staring at it on the kitchen table when he came in from the range, her face pale. "What is it?" he asked, moving to her side. "It is from a lawyer in Denver. Henderson's employer, actually." Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the letter. "I am afraid to open it. Want me to read it first?" She nodded gratefully and handed it over. Garrett slit the envelope open and scanned the contents, his eyebrows rising as he read. When he finished, he looked at Kaitlyn with wonder. "DeVries is dead. Apparently he was shot 3 weeks ago in some kind of dispute over a card game. This lawyer is writing to inform you that with his death, all claims against your father's estate are considered settled. You are free and clear, Kaitlyn. It is over." She stared at him, the words not seeming to register at first. Then tears began streaming down her face and she was laughing and crying all at once. "It is really over. He cannot send anyone else after me. It is really over." Garrett pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she cried out months of fear and tension. "You are safe. We both are. We can build our life without looking over our shoulders." "I cannot believe it," she kept saying. "I cannot believe we are finally free." That night they lay in bed together, Kaitlyn tucked against Garrett's side, talking about the future in ways they had not quite dared before. "I have been looking at land," Garrett admitted. "There is a section about 10 miles from here, right along the river. Good water, decent grass. The man who owns it wants to sell and move back east. I think I have almost enough saved to make an offer." "Really?" Kaitlyn propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "How soon?" "Maybe another month or 2 if we are careful. It would be tight for a while, just a small herd to start." "But it would be ours, Kaitlyn, our own place." Her eyes were shining. "I have been saving too, not much, but every bit helps. And Garrett, there is something else, something I need to tell you." The serious tone in her voice made him focus completely on her face. "What is it?" "I am with child," she said softly. "I am fairly certain. All the signs are there and I have missed my monthly twice now." For a moment Garrett could not breathe. Then joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "A baby. We are having a baby," she nodded, a smile breaking across her face. "Are you happy? I know we have not been married that long and we are still saving for the land, but I am happy, Garrett. I am so happy." "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, pulling her down for a kiss. "This is everything, Kaitlyn. You, a baby, our own land. It is more than I ever dared dream about." They held each other in the darkness, talking about names and cradles and what their life would look like with a little one running around. Garrett placed his hand on her still flat stomach and marveled at the miracle of it all. Just a few months ago, she had stepped off that stagecoach with fear in her eyes and nowhere to go. Now she was his wife, carrying his child, and they were about to start their own ranch. Life had a funny way of working out. The next 2 months passed in a blur of activity. Garrett made an offer on the land, and after some negotiation, it was accepted. He spent every spare moment out there, building a small house with help from some of the other ranch hands. It was not much, just 2 rooms to start with the promise of more later, but it was solid and well built with a good roof and real glass windows that Kaitlyn had insisted on. Kaitlyn, her pregnancy starting to show now, spent her time preparing for the move. Sally threw her a small celebration, and the ranch women gave her practical gifts: a quilt, some dishes, a rocking chair that one woman's husband had carved. The generosity and acceptance brought tears to Kaitlyn's eyes. "I never had this," she told Garrett one evening as they sat in their cabin, surrounded by boxes and bundles ready for the move. "A community, people who cared about what happened to me. I did not realize how lonely I had been until I found you." "You will never be lonely again," he promised. "And our child will grow up knowing they are loved and wanted and safe. That is worth more than anything." They moved to their new land in early spring of 1879, when the worst of the winter cold had passed, but before the brutal summer heat set in. The house sat on a slight rise overlooking the Pecos River, with grazing land stretching out in all directions. Garrett had managed to purchase 15 head of cattle to start, and they had 2 good horses and a milk cow. It was a small operation, but it was theirs. Kaitlyn took to ranch life with a determination that amazed Garrett. Even pregnant, she worked hard, tending a vegetable garden she had planted near the house, caring for the chickens they had bought, learning to do the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. She sang while she worked, her voice carrying across the prairie, and the sound of it made Garrett's heart swell every time he heard it. The baby came in late June, a boy they named Gabriel after Garrett's father, who had passed 2 years earlier. The birth was hard, and there were moments when Garrett, pacing outside the bedroom while the midwife from Chisum Ranch worked, thought he might go mad with worry. But then he heard the thin wail of a newborn, and the midwife was calling him in, and there was Kaitlyn, exhausted but beaming, holding a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. "He is perfect," Garrett said in wonder, touching one impossibly small hand with his finger. Gabriel's fingers wrapped around his, and something in Garrett's chest cracked open with love so fierce it was almost painful. "He looks like you," Kaitlyn said softly, her eyes never leaving the baby's face. "He is lucky then. He got your stubbornness, I bet." Garrett leaned down to kiss her forehead. "You were so brave, Kaitlyn. I am in awe of you. We made him together," she said. "Our son, the first of our family." The first year on their own land was hard but satisfying. Money was always tight, and there were moments when Garrett wondered if they would make it. But the cattle thrived. They added 6 more head by the end of the year, and Kaitlyn's garden produced more than enough vegetables to see them through. Gabriel grew fat and happy, and by his first birthday he was toddling around the yard while Kaitlyn worked, babbling nonsense and laughing at everything. In the evenings, after Gabriel was asleep, Garrett and Kaitlyn would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over their land. It became their ritual, a time to talk about the day, make plans for the future, and simply exist together in the peace they had built. "You remember the day we met?" Kaitlyn asked one such evening, her hand in Garrett's. "Every detail. You looked so scared but so fierce." "I knew right then you were someone special. I thought you were kind," she said. "In a world that had been very unkind, you were gentle and good. That meant everything to me." "You gave me purpose," Garrett said honestly. I had been drifting, working hard but not really building toward anything. Then you came along and suddenly I had a reason to dream bigger, to want more from life. We have built something good here, Kaitlyn said, looking out over their land. Something real and lasting. We have, Garrett agreed, and it is only going to get better. He was right. Over the next few years, their ranch grew steadily. The herd expanded to 50 head, then 100. They hired a young cowboy to help with the heavy work, and Kaitlyn's garden became large enough that they could sell produce in town. They added rooms to the house, and when Gabriel was 3, Kaitlyn gave birth to twin girls they named Grace and Hope. 2 years after that, another son came, Samuel, and their family felt complete. The children grew up strong and happy on the ranch, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with chores appropriate to their ages. Gabriel turned into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the cattle and had his father's patience. Grace was wild and adventurous, always climbing trees or trying to rope the chickens, while Hope was gentler, content to help her mother in the garden or play with the barn cats. Samuel was still a baby, but he was already showing signs of having his mother's stubborn determination. On Gabriel's 8th birthday in 1887, Garrett sat on the porch watching his family. Kaitlyn was laughing as Grace chased Hope through the yard, their dresses flying, while Gabriel showed Samuel how to stack blocks on the porch. The ranch had grown to nearly 300 head of cattle, and they had hired 3 permanent hands. They were not wealthy, not by any means, but they were comfortable and secure, with money in the bank and plans to expand even further. "What are you thinking about?" Kaitlyn asked, coming to sit beside him. At 31, she was even more beautiful than when he had first seen her, the years and hard work giving her a confidence and peace that radiated from her. "Just remembering," Garrett said, pulling her close. "That frightened woman who stepped off a stagecoach 9 years ago. She has come a long way." Kaitlyn smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. She had help. A cowboy who gave her peace when she desperately needed it, who gave her something worth trusting in when she had lost faith in people. "And she gave him everything," Garrett said softly. "Love, family, a purpose. She made him whole." They sat together as the sun set over the land they had carved out of the harsh New Mexico prairie, their children playing around them, the sounds of cattle lowing in the distance. It had not been easy, and there had been dark moments when it seemed like they might not make it. But they had held on to each other, trusted in their love, and built something that would last far beyond their own lives. "Do you ever regret it?" Garrett asked. "Running away, coming here, all the struggles we have had." Kaitlyn turned to look at him, and her green eyes were clear and certain. "Not for a single moment. Every hardship, every challenge, it was all worth it to get to this. To have you and our children and this life we have made. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "I love you, Kaitlyn Dawson," Garrett said, using her married name with satisfaction. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond. And I love you, Garrett. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a life worth living and a family worth fighting for. That is a gift I can never repay." "You repay it every day," he said, kissing her temple. "Every single day." As darkness fell over their ranch, the family moved inside. Garrett helped Kaitlyn get the younger children ready for bed while Gabriel, old enough to be trusted, checked on the horses one last time. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, everything they had built together filling every corner. That night, lying in bed with Kaitlyn curled against his side, Garrett thought about the unlikely path that had led them here. A frightened woman and a cowboy who had been unable to look away from her fear. Such a small moment, a decision to help that had taken only seconds, but it had changed everything. He had given her peace and something worth trusting. She had given him love and purpose. Together, they had carved out a piece of paradise in the harsh landscape of the New Mexico territory, building a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. The children grew, the herd expanded, and the land prospered under their careful stewardship. Gabriel, at 15, was already as tall as his father and had his same steady temperament. He had started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, and Garrett could see the serious future in his son's eyes when he spoke of her. Grace and Hope, at 12, were a matched set of energy and mischief, helping their mother with the increasing administrative work of running a successful ranch. Samuel, at 10, was proving to have a talent with horses that surprised everyone. And through it all, Garrett and Kaitlyn remained the steady center, their love deepening and maturing with each passing year. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other like they could not quite believe their good fortune. By 1895, the Dawson Ranch was one of the most successful operations in that part of New Mexico. They had expanded to over 1,000 head of cattle and employed a dozen permanent hands. The original small house had grown into a sprawling ranch house with multiple bedrooms and even indoor plumbing, a luxury that made Kaitlyn laugh with delight every time she thought about it. Gabriel had married his sweetheart and built his own house on the far edge of their property, working the ranch alongside his father. Grace had surprised everyone by announcing her intention to become a teacher and was studying for the examination. Hope had taken over the ranch's bookkeeping entirely, showing a head for numbers that impressed even the banker in town. Samuel, at 18, was breaking horses for half the ranchers in the territory and making quite a name for himself. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett took Kaitlyn back into town, to the exact spot where that stagecoach had stopped all those years ago. It was not much changed, though the town had grown some, more buildings and more people drawn by the prosperity of the cattle industry. "Do you remember?" he asked, standing there with his wife of 2 decades. "Every second," Kaitlyn said. "I was so scared, Garrett, so certain that my life was over before it had really begun, and then you stepped forward and everything changed." "You changed my life just as much," he reminded her. "Probably more. I was just going through the motions until you came along." Kaitlyn smiled up at him, and in her face he could still see traces of that frightened young woman, but overlaid now with layers of confidence and peace and hard-won wisdom. "We saved each other, I think." "That is what love does, real love. It makes both people better and stronger." "It does," Garrett agreed. "And I would not trade a single day of these 20 years, not even the hard ones, because all of it, every struggle and every triumph, we faced it together." They held each other there in the middle of town, two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something that would endure. Around them, life went on, people going about their business in the growing frontier town. But for Garrett and Kaitlyn, time seemed to stop, and they were back to that moment when everything had changed. That evening, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, for Gabriel and his wife had recently had a daughter, they celebrated their anniversary with a meal that lasted hours, full of laughter and stories and love. Garrett looked around the table at the family they had created, at the life they had built from nothing but determination and love, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost sacred. "Thank you," he whispered to Kaitlyn later as they prepared for bed. "For what?" "For stepping off that stagecoach, for being brave enough to run toward something better, for choosing me, choosing us, choosing this life." Kaitlyn kissed him, long and sweet. "I did not choose you, Garrett, we chose each other. And I would make that choice 1,000 times over and never regret it once." As they lay in bed that night, wrapped in each other's arms just as they had been for 20 years, Garrett thought about the incredible journey they had been on together. From that moment of fear and uncertainty to this place of peace and prosperity, they had walked every step side by side. She had arrived with frightened eyes, looking for an escape and finding instead a home. He had given her peace and something worth trusting, and in return she had given him purpose and love beyond measure. Together, they had built a legacy that would endure for generations, written into the very land they had tamed and nurtured. The Wild West was indeed wild, harsh and unforgiving and dangerous. But it was also a place where two people could find each other against all odds, where love could bloom in the desert and put down roots deep enough to weather any storm. It was a place where a frightened woman and a steady cowboy could carve out paradise and live happily ever after. And that, Garrett thought as sleep claimed him, was the truest miracle of all. In the years that followed, the Dawson Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations who remembered the story of how it all began. The tale of Kaitlyn's arrival and Garrett's kindness became family legend, told to children and grandchildren as an example of what love and courage could build. The ranch stood as a testament to what two people could accomplish when they chose to trust each other, to build together rather than apart. And though time eventually claimed both Garrett and Kaitlyn, their love story lived on in the land they had nurtured, in the children they had raised, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale. A woman had arrived with frightened eyes, running from a past that threatened to consume her. A cowboy had given her peace, protection, and most importantly, something worth trusting in when she had lost all faith. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, proving that even in the harshest landscape, love could not just survive but flourish. Their story became part of the fabric of New Mexico itself, woven into the history of the territory that had given them both a second chance at happiness. And if sometimes, in the quiet of evening when the light falls golden across the Pecos River Valley, it seems like you can still hear laughter from that old ranch house, or see two figures sitting close together on a porch watching the sunset, well, maybe that is just the land remembering. Remembering the love that shaped it, the courage that claimed it, and the two souls who found in each other everything they had been searching for. Their legacy lived on not just in their descendants or in the successful ranch that bore their name, but in the very idea that kindness and love could conquer fear and build something that time itself could not diminish.